I'm gonna turn my volume up because I'm too quiet. What?
You have such a quiet
I
voice.
do.
It cracked me up when you were like, I don't know what's going to happen. I'm so loud. I'm like, I hate to break it to you, but you're very quiet.
1, 2, 3, 4.
I am ready.
All right. Hello.
Hello, I am Piper.
And I'm Grace.
Welcome to What Do You Think podcast.
Yes, welcome back.
Thanks for all of the support and to everyone who listened to our first episode. That was very kind of you.
Yeah.
We are excited to get into this controversial documentary. I don't know if it's even controversial. I mean, I don't really feel like it can be.
The way they presented it, it's hard. I don't know.
It's hard for you to see like more than one side. Yeah.
There's a lot of duality with this documentary.
There's a lot in this It broke my heart. It really, mostly I was just sad, to be honest, watching this. I was just like, here's just another reason why people hate Christians because of stuff like this.
Oh, man.
And it really led me to believe that I have yet to see good things come from a megachurch, if I'm being honest.
Interesting. I actually have some, because I'm going to bring up our megachurch that we've been a part of, and I actually had most of good things to say.
Oh, well, that's good.
Yeah.
Okay.
I will say, I think all megachurches have gone through really rough patches, but I think certain megachurches have found redemption. I honestly think Hillsong's actually found some redemption since all this went down.
No. I'm sorry. Maybe I should rephrase what I was saying. That's not to say that all mega churches are bad and all they produce are bad things.
Right.
That's not true.
Okay.
What I'm saying is maybe what I should have said is I have yet to see a mega church that has not crashed and burned in some very public way.
Yeah.
And for people to be negatively affected by that and walk away from the church ultimately. So I wonder, is it worth it? Is it worth having mega churches?
Interesting.
Because you can plant small churches and grow them and replant them and break them up into smaller bits so that you can be attentive and you can use precaution and have safety measures and all those things. Anyway, those are just some thoughts after watching this.
No, yeah, I honestly, and it popped into my head. Yeah, I think sometimes megachurches do have to crash and burn. And also it's like, why are you growing so rapidly? Is your goal to be big, or is it to share Jesus? And I think Hillsong kind of lost their...
Oof.
I don't even know if they ever... Well, because we'll get into it.
I was going to say, we're going to get into it. We're getting ahead of ourselves.
In case you weren't aware, we watched the Secrets of Hillsong documentary. So we are getting into that today. If you don't want any spoilers, we are recapping. So in this episode, we're going to go through episode 1 and 2. So if you don't want any spoilers, go watch that first and then come back.
Yeah.
And then this is going to be a 2-parter. So in 2 weeks, we'll release part 2 and we'll go through episodes 3 and 4.
Yeah.
I honestly think it could have been a 3-episode documentary, to be honest.
Yeah, they stretched it a bit. They had they dumped a lot of information.
Yeah, well, in episode 4 got into, like, the college, and I was just like...
Yeah, the 4th one was not... It didn't... To be honest, not a lot stuck out to me in the 4th one. It was more of a wrap-up, but...
Yeah, for sure. So before we jump in, a note on our content. We'll get into the topic of cheating, sexual abuse, substance abuse, and attempted suicide in this episode. So listeners' discretion is advised. So I guess in case listeners don't know, which I'm sure most people do, what is Hillsong? It is a global Pentecostal church movement that began in Australia and was founded by Brian Houston. They have what was a bigger and more well-known church in New York City, and that was up until 2020 led by Pastor Carl Lentz. And they're also known for their worship music, which is how most people know them. Mm-hmm. That's how I knew them. I didn't know they were a church, actually.
I didn't know at all until truly, I think maybe a few years ago.
It was a couple years ago.
Didn't know.
Yeah, for sure. And then they have a college called Hills College in Australia.
Have a synopsis of the first episode before we kind of jump into it?
I feel like I'm just jumping into it.
Great.
We'll just kind of recap. So Vanity Fair created this documentary, and it was directed by Stacey Lee, who is not a Christian.
Yeah. They did not have really hardly anything good to say about Christianity in general.
Yeah, I feel like they didn't even really get into Christianity. It was more just like the
church.
The church, but the way that they did it, it very much felt like you're making church God right now.
Yes, no, I agree. I wrote down, I said, this documentary is, I think, just as manipulative as the Hillsong Church maybe was.
Yeah, well, and it's hard because I watched an interview with Stacey Lee, and she was actually brought into it a little bit later. So they decided to make this documentary, and she was hired for it after another director fell through, I think.
Okay.
And her goal, and let me see if I can find that note, because I know I wrote it down. So for her, it was important for them that they balanced out everyone's perspectives and not just Carl's, because originally they actually interviewed all these people and did not expect Carl to actually come on the documentary.
I was shocked when I figured out he came on.
I was too.
And we'll get into that of who Carl Lentz is and how he was a big reason why this documentary was made. Mm-hmm. Well, should we just go ahead and say Carl Lentz was the lead pastor of the New York church and very publicly had an affair on his wife, and he did not come forward with it necessarily. It was found out, and then he was very publicly removed from the church. That information was shared, and they kind of went into hiding. Not into hiding. They went into healing, honestly. They went into healing mode for a few years, and then he was in this documentary. He gave an interview, and I was really surprised.
Yeah. But I had an issue immediately with the creators just because, you're supposed to watch this documentary and know that you're going to be presented facts.
Yeah.
And I think they did. But I'm already going into this skeptical because... You get the intro, and it's of these Catholic children walking in a group. Yeah. And I think that alone...
And it's very creepy, and there's a lot of, ominous music in the background.
That alone already tells you how unqualified they were to make this documentary, because you want this to be truthful. But I'm also do you not understand the difference between denominations? Yeah. Why are we just seeing little Catholic children?
Oh, I guarantee you they do. There's just a level of...
Christianity is all the same, or religion is all the same.
It's all the same, and there's also, I really believe this, just maybe it's because I just don't believe in humanity a lot, but 100% there is a creepy, stigma attached to little Catholic children walking around because of all of the things that have happened in recent years and has come out. I was going to say it's happened way longer than recent years, I guarantee, but all the stuff that's, just come out about all the horrific priests and molesting children and all of that, and so it adds this
allegations coming out.
Yes, so it adds this level of darkness already. So right there at the beginning they hit you with that image and you're like, ugh, I feel icky.
Yeah, that's true. Yeah, and I think honestly, I don't know if this documentary would have much foundation if Carl Lentz hadn't agreed to be a part of this. I don't think they would have a foundation to land on or anything different to present, especially considering there's an HBO documentary released last year about Hillsong.
Was there really?
Called Hillsong Exposed.
Interesting. Well.
And everyone's complaint, though, was that why is Carl Lentz not speaking up? But then now he's on this documentary, and they're like, why is he wanting TV time?
Oh, okay. All right, people.
Just y'all need to chill.
Well, it's of course they are. Of course they're throwing a fit, no matter what he does, because you can't please anybody. Everyone's going to be mad about something.
I do think the danger of this documentary, too, was that they did try and show the two sides to it, but when... when a Christian is watching this, you are seeing one side, but then a non-Christian is going to see another side. And they're going to hear another thing. And so it's like, I wish they could have made it so that we all came to the same place. And I know that's really hard to do.
Yeah.
But anyway, so, let's go into how Hillsong was founded. Frank Houston started the Hills Church. He hands it over to Brian Houston, his son, who changes the church to Hillsong. So big people start attending their church, including celebrities. So they move out of the country and opened up Hillsong, New York City, where Selena Gomez and Justin Bieber were known for attending, which is how I originally found out about that church, actually.
Oh, really? Interesting.
Justin Bieber, I was a big fan of him as a kid.
Oh,
in,
of course.
2012. And
We all were.
Yeah. I mean, you can't not be.
You could
right?
not be, baby.
Yeah. And so, that's how I knew about Carl Lentz. And then obviously I already knew Hillsong music. So Carl Lentz was the head of this church. And we'll get into that. But there was, he was there for about a decade as lead pastor. I think 2010 to 2020. And then was asked to step down due to moral failings. That's the wording they used. So moral failings, and I'll put a pin in that. But what are your initial thoughts on Carl Lentz as a preacher when you see this part of the documentary? Because neither of us knew about Carl Lentz. Really.
I had no idea who he was before I watched this documentary.
Right.
I literally had no idea.
Yeah.
Well, so first of all, when the documentary started up, immediately was just hit with this, oh, wow, this reminds me of Southeast, my old church that I left when I was 17 because I don't even know necessarily what I would say. I left when I was 17 because I told my parents, I was like, I do not think this is legit. It was just odd. The smoke and the attractive, tight clothes wearing, and that, that's maybe judgmental of me, but all of the people on stage that are jumping around and singing worship songs that aren't actually worship, that are just talking about yourself, and the emotional, swelling, all this stuff, the sermons that are all about you, that are not getting into theology and the word, that they're pulling scriptures and just talking about topics, and they're telling us all, go out and bring people to church, and go out and, bring people in and preach the gospel. And I'm I'm 16. I don't know what to do. I don't know where my faith is, or, stuff like that. And so it was just interesting, I think, watching this, where I was like, oh, that reminds me. I have a lot of issues with that, with Southeast, to be honest with you. That's just me being real, and other people don't, and that's fine and great. But I personally do. And so that was interesting, getting into this documentary, where I was like, oh my goodness, this reminds me of Southeast. It just felt very comfortable. And so his style of preaching, when Carl Lentz walked on stage, very young, attractive, very stylish man, that was very normal to me. It was interesting watching this documentary and all these different people being like, oh, so different. He was so young and attractive and hip, and he knew the right things to say. He had tattoos and all this stuff. And I was like, that's just for me, I'm like, that's just normal. That was just kind of my high school a little bit. Yeah. That's just kind of what it was. And so they get into this bit where they're bringing up Carl Lentz, and he's preaching, and he's delivering this impactful, he is an amazing speaker. He is a very good speaker. He has a way with words. He's very, very good. But as he's telling this deep emotional, story about his life or whatever, and then brings God into it, and I can hear, because I went to Southeast, I can hear them start to kick up the guitars and the piano in the background, and the swell of music that people are getting, and I'm getting choked up watching it, because they're manipulating me too. I don't I don't know if I would have felt emotion if they hadn't worked the way the speaker is talking, and all the music is going, and the lights are dimming, and all these things. They're just working all these elements, I think, to their advantage to make you feel this certain way, which I'm not saying that it's wrong to be a really good speaker. It is. I think you have to be a good speaker to be able to be a pastor.
Yeah.
Like, you have to be able to reach
That has
people
to be
and
a good
resonate with
thing.
people. Yes, that's a great, good thing. I just have a lot of suspicion and a lot of with that kind of preaching. I don't know. I have a lot of guards up, and so then they get into his image and the way he acts and behaves. And they go through all these little clips that are spliced here and there, and they're splicing in runway models and people playing basketball like on the courts and all these like juvenile things, and they've got Pretty Boy, like this song playing in the background. Yeah. And so your disgust for him is welling up.
Yeah.
And I stopped. I was listening to it because I was like, ugh. I was like, wait, why am I so gross? I don't even know this man. Like, I don't even know this man. But, like, I'm feeling, like, ick watching him.
I was immediately defensive of him.
Interesting.
Well, you know what? So I've seen this documentary almost, like, 3 times now. First time, I think I was just skeptical in general because I was like, okay, this documentary is obviously here to reveal negative things about a church. Mm-hmm. So I was immediately, I think, defensive anyway. And I was like, okay. So I think I was very skeptical. And so I was seeing these things and I was seeing how they were presenting it. And I was like, I don't know how accurately they're presenting Carl. Because he did. I never heard Carl Lentz's preaching. So when I was seeing these clips, he definitely seemed overhype. Very emotional. Very hip. He is very charismatic. And that is a little off-putting.
Well, not even off-putting to me necessarily. It was just like the way they were manipulating the documentary made me feel grossed out. But when I took a step back, I was like, I think it's interesting watching him in the clubs or shooting hoops, like with his jackets and his hair and his attitude, seeming to be like, like fake self-absorbed pastor.
He was very pop culture.
Right. Like, and I think people would watch it and be like, like fake self-absorbed pastor. But if he was steering clear of the world and wore button-up shirts and didn't drink and do anything, it'd be like, religious stuck-up pastor. Like, there's no winning in this game of Christianity. You know what I mean?
It's so hard to, like, when you are part of a big church, you gotta grab these people in a way. But yeah, and you get into who they call Mama Jones, who's this, wise old woman and is well known and loved in the church, and she kind of stuck out to Carl and his wife just because it was a lot of young people in the church, and she wasn't. She came because her daughter went to that church. And she's someone who it seems like Carl actually talked to often and came to for advice or wisdom. But she talks about how Carl basically cried every sermon. And she posed and imitated his face that he would make before he cried.
And it was dead. It was straight up.
Spot
it was amazing.
On. But they go into several shots of Carl doing that exact pose.
They do.
And I was like, ugh.
Well, and they pair them with old oil paintings of Christ, like on the cross or something.
Crying,
Which I was like, come on, guys.
I didn't like that.
I didn't like it either.
So with that, it was hard to discern, like, how genuine is this guy as a pastor, I think, until we see his interview, honestly. And that's where I changed my mind a little bit. And we'll get into that a lot later. But
one of the people said there would be, one of the interviewees, said there would be no Hillsong without Carl Lentz. And, that's a bad thing to hear.
Yeah.
One pastor does not a church make. That is a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, or even one of them said he has a way of seeming very genuine, and I think he's an amazing actor.
Ooh, yeah, that was kind of hard to hear. And, like, hard against his character as a person, because we don't actually know him. We don't know We're just one of the millions of people who've watched him from afar.
Right.
So that's the struggle with documentaries like this,
Yeah, that especially because these congregants do technically know Carl, and they're talking about him in this
but they
way.
don't.
But they don't.
That's the thing.
You're right.
'Cause, like, at Southeast, like, when I moved from big giant church, mega church, to, like, my small church that I'm at now, people are like, "Oh, have you met Pastor whatever yet at the church I go to?" I was like, "What? No." And they were like, "Why?" I'm like, "Because you don't like I don't meet the pastor. That's weird. I've never met Kyle Idleman. No, like, I'm one of thousands of people who went to his church." So that was a weird concept for me to be like, you actually know your pastor.
I've met him, but only because his kids did stuff at my theater.
Oh, cool. Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
Yeah. I didn't.
We move into seeing a little bit more about what the church is about. People speaking in tongues and like things like that. Speaking in tongues, okay. We know that's real.
Yeah.
We literally know it's real. It says in scripture.
Yep.
I have a hard time with it, man, because I cannot tell when it's real. Because when people, I struggle when I see these in the documentaries of people just being like, Ashabadi daba, duba da da, like just saying all these things and like flopping over like fish on the ground. I'm like, what? How is that pointing me to Jesus? Like I heard this story in a church once where this woman started speaking in tongues and everyone was like listening to her and was like, oh, like so cool. And this man from the back of the room was like, stop, like make her stop, like she's cursing God in this language, I speak this language or whatever. And it's just very, and everyone's like, oh my gosh. And so
you gotta
do stuff like that too.
You gotta have a lot of discernment with it, because it is really easy for it to be.
That's what I was talking about with my husband. Like it's so easy to, I think, like do stuff like that to conjure up like emotion and notoriety, but the point of it should be to encourage the church body and point them back to Christ ultimately.
Yeah.
I'd love to see it. That'd be really cool.
You've never seen it?
No.
Wow.
No, I've never seen it.
Wow.
I grew up in an evangelical church.
You should hang out around my grandmother more often.
Does she speak in tongues?
She has spoken in tongues.
She has a gift. That's really cool.
Yeah. Yeah, Sovereign Grace. Yeah, we spoke in tongue.
Are they...
they're technically Reformed Baptists, so speaking in tongue and those gifts are actually pretty rare to see. But yeah, we've always been open to it there.
I'm very much open to it. I just did not. I grew up in the very...
more Carl Lentz type church.
Carl Lentz, but Carl Lentz without like the...
Not Pentecostal.
No, not Pentecostal at all.
I don't even know what you would call.
I don't know if we talked about spiritual gifts ever in my church. I have no memory.
As far as I know, they never have.
I have no memory of talking about it. I may be wrong.
I'll look into that.
Anyway.
Well, while we're on the topic of Carl, we'll just get into him, I think, if that sounds good.
Yeah.
So New York City Hillsong was founded by Carl and Brian Houston's son, Joey Houston. Joey did more of the worship side, and Carl was very much the pastor. So they started out by wrapping up Bibles and going to nightclubs. In New York City to present them to DJs and other people.
See, that's really cool.
I honestly love that.
No, that's awesome.
I was like, that's honestly epic.
That's really cool. In New York City, no less.
And the church also started in a nightclub.
I thought that was amazing.
Yeah.
That was so funny.
So since nightclubs aren't typically used during the day, they rented one out and had volunteers. And they talked about they would like clean up the vomit from the night before and drinks and set up for church. So yeah, and that's, the church was kind of also known for like, come as you are, welcome home. Carl always said, we love everybody. Well, Brian would be a little bit more conservative and talk about, we do love everybody, but we do believe in these conservative things.
Which is good.
Yeah.
I mean, that's the thing. They made him out to be this villain. He's conservative.
Yeah.
He's evil.
There was even though, like, I think his name was Josh, the gay guy. And he talked about his story.
That was a difficult situation.
That was. And I think he's actually one of the only congregants of the church who had a solid story of why he dealt with church hurt. The other ones I had some issues with.
Yeah.
But with him, I totally understood he was leader of their choir.
Yeah.
He was told he was openly gay. He came with his boyfriend every Sunday.
Right.
And he had the heart, like he was saving himself for marriage, so he was open about that. And then
it's difficult when, so like as Hillsong said, they believe that homosexuality is a sin.
Yeah. But it sounds like they kept that really quiet up until Brian made it onto Survivor.
Yeah.
And he asked Carl, can I talk about the church and like my story? And he said, absolutely. And then...
Well, he asked Carl.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry. I thought you said he asked Brian. Okay.
Oh, I might have. He asked Carl. Carl said yes, go for it. He did that with his boyfriend. He was on Survivor.
Yeah.
And then immediately afterwards, Brian goes on TV and says, we don't believe...
Yeah. In homosexuality. Everyone is welcome in our church, but we do believe this is a sin.
But then he also made the comment that we don't have a gay leader in our church.
Ugh.
And that's where I'm like, ooh.
Yeah, ouch.
I totally understand speaking up about, like, hey, we actually don't believe in that, but we love Josh. But
Right.
he said we don't have a gay leader in our
that's
church.
rough. That's rough.
And that would totally be where I'd immediately be like, excuse me? And I think I would be a lot more skeptical if I had heard that.
Yeah. Oh, for sure.
Yeah, so after that, Brian's belief on that was very clear. And yeah, they just kind of talk about Carl for a while about he was kind of A+ for a church pastor, but C- for society, which I wrote in my notes. In my opinion, that means you're doing things right.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, we're not meant... And it's hard, but, like, we're not meant to be on the same page as society. Mm-mm. And I think where Carl got in trouble was more being on the same page eventually. He kind of got a little bit too into the culture.
Carl, yeah. No, I agree.
And he got way too into his head.
There were a lot of interviews that he would evade direct questions because he didn't want to upset anybody, which I understand. I understand that, the fear. But you gotta push past that because it's all good and well to say, well, I want people to come to my church. I'm like, great, but what does it stand on? You're not being clear.
Right. Yeah. And where it got a little tricky, I didn't write down what year this was, but I want to say 2016. 5 women of the church had come together to write the church a letter saying there was issues going on with power and leadership and sexual harassment that they were concerned about. It seemed Hillsong responded to the complaints and had a meeting with them, but they never did anything to remedy the situation.
The 5 is what they called themselves.
Yeah, the 5.
Because you cannot have, and this is one of my problems with like a giant megachurch, you cannot have thousands upon thousands of congregants and not have sexual misconduct. Like, you just can't because people are sinners.
But don't you think when you have a big megachurch, they are, or at least should be, more intent with who they allow in leadership?
Yes, extremely. I'm not letting them off the hook at all.
Because they're
seemed, completely on the hook.
Yeah,
for that.
Seemed to me like the people who were doing the sexual harassment were all in leadership.
Yeah, the safety of your church members and protection of them should be your first priority as leaders of a church. And yeah, no, I completely agree with that. We get into it later when this young woman said a young man in the church, I think he was like a young I think he was a young leader. I don't remember that correctly, so nobody quote me on that, but he had, I guess, not molested her, but like, well, maybe that he had like groped her. Yeah, something like that. Yeah. And then Brian Houston got up and said something to the effect of,
he didn't say anything. He gave him a better job.
Yeah, exactly. Because we'll remember his interview. He like said his interview where he was like, you know, this is a good young man who made a dumb choice. And I'm like, what? Like, yes, but like, he's married. Like, that's,
yeah.
And you like, no, he's fired immediately. Yeah. And you also provide any amount of counseling and help you can to the young woman who was put in that position. Like, that's horrible.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't know.
That's just, and it sounded like he got a better job just because his dad was high up in the church too. Yeah, that's gross. Very gross.
So you also have those issues in big mega churches. Nepotism.
You're right. Yeah, so nothing happened after the sexual harassment stuff came out. But then in 2020, so a few years later, Carl Lentz was fired from pastorship for his moral failings, which is so broad. I hate the term moral failings. That can mean anything. And there wasn't any clarity on it. And it's like, did he murder somebody? Or did he just watch porn?
I was going to say, did he just watch porn? There's no just watching porn.
Yeah, there's no just watch porn. But like, did he...
No, I know what you mean.
You know what I mean? Like, was he not above reproach in the sense of something sexual sin, which is big? Or did he commit a crime?
Yeah.
You know?
Well, because the woman that he had an affair with, which that's what came out. And I don't know. I don't remember if he was the one who said that or if that was said about him. Or if the
What do you
truth
mean?
came out, like that he had an affair.
He didn't confess to any of his sexual misconduct.
Okay.
So Reneen Karim, which is the first woman who came out,
That interview of her being like,
Yeah.
I never meant to hurt his wife. What a load of absolute
well, also
garbage.
she's like in
0 stars to
in
her.
modeling, and her Instagram presence. It was very clear she did it for publicity once she found out he was a pastor.
A woman who knowingly engages in an affair hasn't deserved no respect.
She did
for
not
me.
know he was married.
No,
No.
Okay.
He said he was a sports agent. They met at a dog park.
Okay. Maybe I misheard her. I thought I heard her say, are you, like, not happy in your marriage or something? That she had asked him that. Like, are
You're
you not
right.
happy? Do you remember that?
But then, you know what's interesting, though? Oh, snap.
Hope
You
she
know
enjoyed
what's-
her 5 minutes of fame.
You know what's interesting, though, is, well, she's been on people's podcasts. She's been interviewed.
This is what she wants, y'all. Don't give it to her.
What's interesting, though, is that I don't remember who said it. It wasn't Carl, but he told her he was a sports agent because they met at a dog park. And he said, don't look me up.
Yeah. Carl.
But also, when you say don't look me up, what am I going to do?
I was going to say,
I'm going to immediately
gonna
look you up.
I'm going to pull out my phone.
Yeah, so that's interesting, though, because you're right. She did kind of but maybe she meant in the sense of, was she wondering, or was he not happy in his marriage? I don't know if she directly asked him that.
Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
And it's hard because they really only did a super short clip of her interview.
Yeah,
because she's
teeny
on it.
tiny, but-
I'm honestly, I don't care that much about Reneen Karim.
Yeah.
I care about Leona Kimes. I have, and we'll get into that. I have so many questions about that one. Yeah, so him and his wife, Laura Lentz, who was lead pastor alongside him, both had to step down.
Yeah.
After he was fired, Laura was basically put in a corner and forced to resign. She had no option.
That was really sad.
And that was sad, too. Yeah, so I already went over the story of him and his lover.
Yeah.
But while that was happening, Reed Bogard, who was the Dallas Hillsong pastor, was accused of raping someone, and he quietly stepped down.
Yeah.
And Brian's response to that was to make a video
thank you
for the
your
church
service.
to watch, thanking him for his service
Yeah.
and time at Hillsong.
I don't even know what to say to that.
As we get further into this documentary, I feel like the only things we see of Brian is thanking these people after they've raped people, after they've molested people.
This whole obsession with reputation is slimy and icky.
Well,
and I have such an issue with it. I really do.
If you're more worried about your church falling apart than people not getting hurt, I
Yeah.
mean, I don't want to question people's faith, but are you even a Christian?
Oh, yeah. No, like you're not walking.
You're not walking with the Lord. You're not worried.
You're at least not walking in Him.
You're not focused on God as much as you are yourself. Yeah. Anyway, so after all of that, you get to the last episode, or the last of episode 1, and then there's Carl.
There he is.
Which I truly, I was because I didn't see the trailer before any of this.
Yeah, I was shocked that he gave an interview.
So he sits down, and I'm like, oh my gosh. Like, I immediately, got off my phone, and I was just staring at the screen.
huh?
And I was like, oh, he's here.
And then you watch his face, and either he is an unbelievable actor or he's genuine.
And that was my thought, too. He immediately started the waterworks.
He immediately started the waterworks, and so but walls
then,
go up. What he says. So he takes a second and he says, "God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, and the courage to change the things that I can, and the wisdom to know the difference." Bam.
Yeah.
And I was like,
Right there.
man can write a sentence. It's like, that's really
Am I
good.
Am I wrong, or is that not a practice prayer for Catholics?
I have no idea. I do not know a lot about Catholicism and its practices, to be honest with you.
I could be wrong. There's something about the last line that reminded me of a prayer.
Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, I just felt like with him immediately wanting to cry because of how they've presented him so far, it does automatically make you question if he's genuine or not. It's like, is this exactly... I mean, because it's exactly how people are presenting him. Mm-hmm. And it's like, is that just how he is?
Yeah.
Which I think it is. I think he's just a very emotional man. And that's not a bad thing. But it can be bad if you don't know how to handle your emotions.
Yeah.
Yeah, I don't think he's acting.
I don't think he is. I actually had a lot of respect for him after watching this documentary, and even more respect for his wife.
Yeah. She's the true hero of this
What an amazing woman.
Yeah.
Honestly.
Yeah. Yeah, so it goes back to his time in college and how he met Laura, who grew up with Brian Houston's family.
Yeah.
They were all very close, and he talks about kind of how you think marriage will fix things, and it doesn't, and you still struggle with the sins you had before marriage. So he talks about the stress.
Anything there, it's amplified now.
Yeah,
because there's another person at risk.
Well, there's someone witnessing your life in almost every moment, and you can't hide when you have that.
And if you can, then you're not a good person. Yeah. To be honest with you. If you can hide for a long, long time, yeah, I don't know how I feel about you as a person.
Yeah. So he talks about the stress he was under, how he was abusing his ADHD medication. I don't know if I'm remembering this incorrectly, if I'm thinking of Brian. Did he say he struggled with alcoholism too?
I don't have a memory of him saying that, but he talked about his addictive personality and his addiction in general.
I might be thinking about Brian then. But yeah, and then towards the end he talked about he faced sexual abuse as a kid himself.
He did not, however. I loved the way he spoke was so healthy in that he talked about the hard things, like the sexual abuse he faced as a child and how that was not his fault, and that the things that have happened in his brain nowadays are a result of that abuse, and that's really sad. But that does not excuse his decision to sin in this way. And I just have a lot of respect for, he never, ever made any sort of defense for his actions. Yeah. Or even his character. He was very humble. Yeah. And I think that's the key, is humility. When you are in this position, you cannot be anything but humble if you're in the Lord. That is...
Well, and when you've sinned in that way, you don't get the chance to make excuses for yourself. That's just not a thing. It's like, I'm sorry, you chose to cheat. You chose to sin. You don't get to make excuses for that behavior. And I think he did a really good job of that is on me. Even just owning up to, I know I hurt the church.
Yes, acknowledging the fact that he's thousands of people counted on me and I let them down. Yeah. And that was not okay.
Yeah. And there's only so much you can do with that. And I think he had a healthy boundary of knowing there's nothing I can do to fix that anymore.
I think he said something I just hope with time that I can earn back people's trust. That's all I can do. And that is all you can do. You can't force it. You can't make people look at you a certain way. The only thing you can do is be humble.
Yeah. Yeah, so they interview Laura too, and how she found out about him cheating on her,
which we haven't even talked about. That was really rough.
Yeah,
that was really rough, and we haven't even talked about the other situation with Carl.
We'll get into that.
Okay.
Yeah. So when he gets caught, quote unquote caught, he calls Brian and says, "I'm not doing well," which I had an issue with how that was worded. I think it kind of does put him a little bit in a victim stance of hey, I'm not doing well.
Yep.
But after that, he tells Laura about cheating on her, and they get on an emergency Zoom call with the elders, and they bring up Leona Kimes. So that situation baffles me a little bit.
I was going to say, so who was this woman?
So Leona Kimes and her husband were pastors of Boston Hillsong. And I think what confuses me is that she's in Boston and they're in New York, right? So that's about a 2-hour commute without traffic. She was married. She had kids. And she was nannying the Lentz's kids. Which I think there should be, you know, and I'm not going to, like, blame the Lentz's for this situation. But I think there should be a little bit of discernment of, I can afford a nanny, right? Why are you hiring someone who needs to take care of their own kids, too? Because they talk about, she was there all the time. She skipped a Christmas with her family. To be honest,
it just sounded like a really weird, dysfunctional situation.
Yeah, she skipped a Christmas with her family so she could be with Carl and his family for Christmas.
That was weird.
And Laura even said, like, hey,
I'm good.
You can go home. And she was like, no, I'm okay. She was like, the nanny's at our house. So they also had their own nanny. The Kimes had...
That's weird, guys. That's really weird.
And that was a little bit of a story arc, too. The girl who nannied the Kimes kids, she wanted to be a pastor. She went to Hills College. And she made the comment of the closest thing I could be to being a pastor was a pastor's nanny. And so they used her a little bit as a story arc into that. But yeah, that's just weird. Like, if you have a nanny for your kids so you can nanny someone else's kids, there's something weird going on there. There's something you are escaping or there's something you are a part of that's very unhealthy. And I know, I can imagine for Laura, that's a really hard thing to, like, know something's off. But, like, it's like, how do I address this? Because I've not been in that situation, but I've been in weird situations where it's like, I know something's going on, but I just don't know how to bring it up. Like, hey, I'm seeing something weird. And I can't put my finger on it. So Leona and Carl had a secret relationship.
Yeah.
And then Laura found them in what she calls a compromising position. So we don't know how she found them, but I'm assuming it was like, there's a rumor, I don't remember where I saw it, but like, he was sitting on the couch and she was like on the floor and her head was on his lap. Anyway. So
her reaction to me, a type 8, I was like, completely appropriate reaction.
I know,
absolutely.
right? I bet she's a 3 or an 8.
I love her.
Yeah. But anyway, so she shoved Carl and punched Leona.
Punched her in the face. She, like, tackled her, punched her in the face.
I mean, I'm not going to cuss here, but my only note was LMAO because
I watched that and I was like, I'm over here cheering with, like, my glass, like, yeah.
And listen, I know punching is not a biblical response, but also...
It's not a biblical response.
Kudos to her, because I think if Laura has a biblical right to divorce her husband for this situation, the worst she does is punch the woman who cheated with her husband in the face. Good for you. That's pretty,
honestly,
that's pretty, I mean, good for you.
Yeah, I was watching the situation, and I don't know. She Laura, she apologized, I think, for that, which I was like, why?
Leona stuck around after that.
Yeah, she was still there.
There was no admittance of cheating. She was still a nanny and in the family.
This woman gives me the creeps.
And Leona did not get brought up until that Zoom meeting in 2020.
Yep.
So, and then later, Leona made a blog post about how she was sexually harassed by Carl. And it was called Taking My Voice Back, I think. And I read that blog post.
You did?
It's
what
still
did you
up.
think?
I think it was a little too much. Carl does say it was all consensual. And I honestly believe him. Because as I was reading it, I was thinking, this is a woman who wants to protect her image and her position, honestly. And I know it's hard to say, like, oh, you weren't sexually harassed, because I know I'm not in their situation. But with all the context we're given and all the information, and then reading the blog post, it just doesn't add up, honestly. And I think another sign that it wasn't sexual harassment.
Also, Laura had every right to blame Carl for everything.
Yeah.
So why would she have held this woman accountable?
Right. Or instead of punching Carl in the face, punching Leona.
Yeah.
I think if you're punching the woman, it's very clear that whatever she saw
was consensual.
Leona was probably doing something to Carl.
We don't know for sure.
I don't know for sure.
We don't know for sure, but from what we got.
I'm not believing it. But, so while the church had this emergency Zoom meeting with Carl and Laura had asked for the church to spare public detail because at the time, their teenage daughter had just taken pills to try and end her life, and she was currently in the hospital, which is also
that poor woman.
That's just all a horrible mix of things happening. Of my daughter just tried to end her life, my husband cheated on me with 2 women, and then on top of that, the church did not spare the details.
Yeah.
They still announced it to kind of save their butts. And on top of that, someone recorded the Zoom call and gave the footage to, I think they said, the Daily Mail.
And then Brian, to cap it all off, gave an interview where he basically just tarnished Carl's character, called him a narcissist,
and a liar.
All of these things, and how he was like, in his Australian, I don't think I'm anything like Carl.
I hate his voice, by the way.
I'm just gonna be honest. From the get go, he gave me the ick. He gave me the creeps.
Me too. Yeah.
Truly, and we both have scored high in our discernment spiritual gifts test. So I don't know what that says about
it's number 1 for me, baby.
It's as to say, it's like number 3 or 4 for me.
Yeah.
It's just interesting. It's interesting watching it. And so that interview he gave just kind of further tarnished Carl's character. But then we're like an hour in, so we need to like speed this up.
Yeah. we're almost there, actually, I think. So what's interesting is, so I listened to a couple of Carl's sermons just to kind of and it's also really hard to find his sermons now. They're mostly erased from Hillsong.
Wow.
But one of his last 2 sermons was a series on having a raisin faith.
A raisin faith.
So a faith where the way you live is not producing fruit and you're actually shriveling. And how the Holy Spirit keeps us from stumbling when we look towards Him. So those 2 sermons were preached in September of 2020.
What'd you think?
I think he was preaching to himself.
Which every pastor should.
Yeah. And honestly, as he was talking to, he admitted that he noticed some things in his life where he had a raisin faith. And he obviously didn't say what, but I was like, I honestly think if he hadn't been caught, he would have come there.
Yeah.
He would have gotten there. Because he got fired in November. And so, those were interesting sermons. It was just very clear he was talking to himself. So, and then they kind of get into Jeff Bullock, which he was a figure of the original Hillsong Church, Brian's church in Australia.
Oh, yes, this guy.
He was a big figure in Christian music. He also came up with the name Hillsong. And he was booted off by Brian and never heard from again. And they banned his music in the church.
Well, and then he took a minute to talk about how this guy, Jeff, said it's almost like the minute you start to become bigger than Brian, you kind of have to be brought down.
Yes.
So it sounds like Carl having an affair was like best day of Brian's life.
Well, and especially with all the things that they were hiding and that was about to come up with Brian.
Yeah.
Brian, I think...
It is insane how short of a time span all of this happened.
I know. Well, I think God uses one thing to bring out another. And I think Brian was trying to use Carl as a smokescreen. And I think God was like, no.
Excuse me. Yeah, excuse me.
Yeah.
And amidst all of this, amidst this documentary talking about, we're obviously focusing heavily on Carl and his affair and Brian and these 2 leading figures. Amidst all of this, we're hearing lots of things about Black Lives Matter and what that looked like in the church and the money situation and all of that. The money situation. I was going to say, like, we talk about, like, the sexual harassment, like, going on. And, yeah, it's just it's just interesting. And we probably can't even get into all of that because there's so much. But there are a lot of things going on in the church that are...
I think my overall thing was, with all of that, I think they really... The congregants who came up and had their complaints, I hear their hurt, and I totally get it. I think what I heard from all of them was, you are looking to Carl as God, and you need to look to Jesus.
Yeah.
If you have an issue with, which I had, and I'm not black, so I'm not going to say a lot about that. But when you look at Hillsong, they have black congregants all throughout their church.
They do. But what I thought was, I will say what I thought was interesting that Carl said was, we have 30 locations all over the world, and we don't have one single lead pastor that's not white.
That's also not true.
Oh, it's not true.
The black pastor in Atlanta.
See, I didn't even know that. I was just going off of Carl, and I was like, what an interesting thing.
He did step that, and we'll talk about that. But that pastor,
I was to say, but then we're over here being like, no, there's one guy in this one branch.
You're right.
You know,
I don't know all the pastors, so I don't know how accurate that is. But I did remember seeing that black pastor, and I was like, okay, so, and they do have a lot of black worship leaders.
They do, yeah.
But yeah, you're right, and there probably isn't as much of a huge black presence. But also, like, if you're more worried about that than what
then
is
who's
being
teaching,
then who is teaching, what's being brought to the church, what's happening inside the church, you're focusing on the wrong thing.
Yeah,
you're idolizing the black people in the church and what makes you comfortable, and not, are you in a solid church?
Yeah.
Or even,
I agree.
You know, people aren't affirming my gayness. Well, maybe think about the fact that that's not actually biblical to be gay or living that lifestyle.
Why do you need them to affirm you?
Yeah, or even, you know, the girl who complained that they didn't support women pastors as much as she wanted. It's like, go to a different college and a different church that does, if that's what you want in your life, you know? So although I totally understand everyone's side in the hurt, because that is true for them and that is very real and that's painful, you also still have to look at yourself. And it's like, okay, then what changes do I need to make? If you want to focus more on appeasing your lifestyle, then appease it.
No, I agree. And then, like I said, there were many real issues in the church, like the non-disclosure agreements that you have to sign to work there.
The NDA, so leaders,
hard pass. Nope.
Immediately no.
Like about what you can... Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That gave me the heebie-jeebies.
I didn't like that.
Because people are like, why aren't people speaking up about all these things? Well, they can't. They signed an NDA.
We'll
like,
get
excuse me?
In part 2, we'll get into how the NDAs got really troublesome with affairs and all of that. So yeah, in all this, I think what we see is God reveals what he wants to reveal. And they kind of say that, I think Carl says that train of revealing stuff about Hillsong is not stopping anytime soon. And then it ends with the scene of Brian in court swearing over a Bible.
Yeah.
About telling the whole truth and nothing but the truth, and
This is when it gets really shady.
Yeah, this
part 2 is going to be really intense.
That will all be discussed in part 2. I also found it interesting, Brian denied commentary or interview almost everything, but he did respond in an email denying Jeff Bullock's claims about overworking volunteers.
That's true.
Is the reason that Jeff Bullock got kicked out of the church was because he was telling Brian, like, hey, you're working our volunteers too hard and using them too much, which was a big part of episode 2 or episode 1, I can't remember.
I think it's episode 2. Yeah, just how
Hillsong kind of abused volunteers with how overworked they were. It wasn't just you're coming to church once a week for a couple hours to be in nursery. It was like a full-time job.
It was like 12-hour days, like not getting paid, like they're volunteering. Yeah. Because there's so many people in the church.
Right. So, yeah, that was kind of the first 2 episodes. I think we hit a good chunk of it.
Yeah.
If we got into every detail, it would be so much longer. So if you want to know every detail, I just suggest watching episode 1 and 2.
Well, and like we need to, before we wrap up, we need to talk about like learning about Carl and Laura's story and seeing the healing there that they talked about, which we'll get into at the very end, like more, but they taught, like, there was just a lot of ownership of bad decisions and a lot of them just being humble and being like, this is our family, this is our story. I just had a lot of respect for them and how they handled the situation after everything came out. And I mean, say what you want, they are still a family, joined together and still married.
So I listened to a couple, there's not many people talk about this documentary.
Yeah.
And I'm not going to name the podcast. But, like, someone made the most disgusting comment.
I'm sure it was really horrible.
Basically, like, I'm just guessing why Laura was still in the relationship. And, like, it was probably for just her kids. And once her youngest grows up, they're hoping she just ditches Carl. And I was like,
what a horrible thing to say.
And it's the woman who spoke about it, she's in Hollywood. She works in Hollywood. So I was like, well, of course that's your mindset. But I was like, that is so disgusting. And I just think it really says how much society...
To wish someone's marriage ill and to wish someone
just so
ill...
What, Laura Lentz can live a better life, take the money and run? I don't know. Like, I'm just like, what? He has made a mistake. And I think this is the difference.
We live in a society who hates men.
Yeah.
To be honest.
I think the difference between society and also Christian culture is we don't believe in cancel culture.
No.
Or we shouldn't, at least. There are second chances. You do get to have a chance to have redemption and see your mistake and repent of it, even if you didn't come out with that sin initially. Still put the effort in, go to therapy, work out your relationship
and
with
there
your
are
wife.
consequences when you do not grow and you do not change. Yeah. But it seems as if Carl has put in the effort and they've put in the effort and they've grown and they've changed. And it's not perfect, and they're very open about that, but they're very open also about the fact that they are working through this together as a family.
Yeah.
Which I just really admire.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's the first 2 episodes.
Yeah. We did it. I was like, this is going to be the longest episode, but
it's only an hour.
We did it in a good amount of time.
Not too bad.
Not too shabby. So yeah, next Friday, well, not next Friday.
In a couple Fridays.
In 2 weeks, we will release part 2. We'll be talking about episode 3 and 4.
Woohoo.
Give us your thoughts on...
Tell us what you think.
Yeah.
Tell us what you think about Hillsong and how documentaries like this make you think about the church overall in general, and all your thoughts.
Yeah, thoughts on pastorship and second chances and all those good things. But
sweet.
Thanks for listening. If you made it this far, if you feel compelled, like and subscribe.
Please do.
Give us a good rating.
Go follow us on Instagram.
Even
what
better.
Do you think, pod?
Yeah, get on Instagram. Comment on our stuff. I think that gets us good traction.
Share our stuff, even if you don't like it. Yeah.
Share our stuff and just complain, because it still gives us views.
Yeah.
But until next time.
Until next time.
See you then.